Thank you, Scarlett. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I know there's a lot going on, and it's a challenging time in the world. And we can feel that and see that, and it affects us all. But I am really grateful to all the people around the world joining us, wherever you are, whether you're local or global, to join us on the fifth. This is the fifth one of these conversations around intersectionality and embracing intersectionality. And I've often said that it's a word that's often peppered into conversations on EDI meetings sometimes, and I wish it wasn't. And I wish we had a word that it wasn't really about the nuances of intersectionality, but rather the realities of it. You know, that we have a conversation that EDI itself and what we define it to be isn't relevant unless it has an intersectionality in its foundation, not in its segue or on the top of something or the pretense of something, but really defined for the different narratives that people come up and show up in. So I'm really grateful to everyone listening today and joining us, and people who are listening later on. And I'm especially grateful to my panelists and the team behind DNA to put this together, Scarlett, Ellie, and everybody, but also to Nelson, to Sarah, to Mandeep, all of you joining us today. And I guess I'm going to get into the heart of what we're talking about and sharing this conversation on intersectional leadership. You know, what does it mean to be an intersectional leader? I think it's a great question to ask people. I love that it might not have an answer that's defined. And I think it's the courage of the conversation that makes us go, well, maybe we are, maybe we're not, maybe we define it this way. For me, it's something that I think about a lot, but I don't know if I have an immediate answer on. You know, having said that, I'm going to ask my panelists, and it's okay for them not to have an immediate answer, but let's see. So I think I'll start, if I may, with you, Sarah, first. And your work is, someone I deeply admire. You know that anyway, and I've seen your work, and I think I'm going to ask this question as well. So on a personal level, I suppose you can put, for all of you listening, as a panelist, I guess it is personal anyway. This work, these passions are personal. So maybe I don't need to say it on a personal level, but I'm going to ask the question: how would you personally define intersectional leadership?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. And Atif, it's always great to share a space with you. And whenever I get to talk with you, I come away better for it. But it's exactly that. I wouldn't probably say that I'm an intersectional leader. What I would say is perhaps I'm an intersectional leader in training, and that there is a process of discovery that never really ends. And I thought for a long time that I knew what intersectional leadership was, and really thought about aspects of people's lives, how it all intermingles, and how ultimately we're unique human beings. But actually, recently in a training session that we had with our wonderful colleagues from J&B Consulting, we're doing some anti-racism leadership training. And we've been going now for quite a long time. And we had this session on intersectional leadership. And all of us in the room were able to define intersectionality beautifully. But actually what we couldn't do was really, really get into the depth of what it meant and really take into consideration the issues related to power, positioning, and all of the stuff that we as human beings, because everybody's intersectional, everybody's more than one thing, right?
Hey.
But that doesn't mean to say that therefore you're vulnerable. And so I think that I feel like I'm still on that learning journey and have got lots of support in order to do that. But there are some principles for me that I do think I stick by and hold on to all the time, which is ultimately to have any sense of intersectionality, you have to know yourself. What is your own stuff? What is your own makeup? What are you bringing to the table? That is different from your colleagues. What is your own power play in the situation? So really understanding that, and I'm constantly trying to think about where I am in the situation, and what I'm serving in that space. I think there has to be a huge dose of humility. And I think that where we don't have humility, it goes horribly wrong. And I've seen that time and time again. I see it in my own organisation now. I've seen it over decades of working in this space. The lack of humility and arrogance is quite profound in relation to thinking you know about EDI generally when you don't. That there has to be some personal accountability. And, for leadership, that's incredibly important. Again, how do you show up? I really struggle personally with this whole idea of hierarchy, but nonetheless, that power play is real in organisations, in the world, in life, and therefore you have to understand it. You have to be accountable for how you show up. I am very good at drawing on expertise, so I have to know quite a lot, but I don't have to know everything. But I do have to know people who do know what I don't know, and be okay about asking them and getting their support, and that vulnerability. And so I guess I don't have a definition. I wouldn't sit here and say I can wear the badge and tick, job done. But it is something that I think about a lot. And I don't think we're at all there in understanding what it is. Generally, I would say in civil society, I can't talk for the public sector.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you. The sincerity of that was obviously going to be there, but I know you, but thank you. That was really lovely and said. So Mandeep, if I may hand to you as well, and I'll ask the same question, then there is no answer that's, it's just the grace of whether we have the courage to really answer it. And you do. So how would you personally define intersectional leadership for you? What does it mean for you?
Yeah, I think there'll probably be some overlaps with what Sarah said. So, but I think where I want to start is by saying, for me, understanding what intersectional leadership is, you have to really understand the world we live in, and that equity and justice, it's not afforded to all, and particularly some groups. So it's about really acknowledging and understanding how marginalization works, and how can we center marginalized people and communities in the work that we do. So for me, yes, I have my own intersectional identity, but I'm also a senior leader. I have power. So how do I use my power to explicitly serve those who have been historically underserved? And so for me, it really requires an awareness of my identity, my privilege, my power, and my positionality in all of that, which is very similar to what Sarah was saying. Because as much as I experience marginalization, it will be different to other groups. And I have to understand that. I have to take the time out to really understand that. So, for me, I'm a social justice practitioner. So I take an anti-oppressive, equity-based approach to what I do. So for me, it's not just about data and stats. It's about that human experience. It's about that lived experience. So as an intersectional leader, what am I doing to take the time to build relationships, to understand? I need to listen more than I talk at times. I need to be humble in that. I need to sit in discomfort when it comes and check myself when I need to check myself, because reflective practice is really important to me. But it's about really owning that. And I'm okay with not having all the answers. We're not supposed to, because if we did, we would have done this work by now. Yeah. But it's how you show up in the space, and understanding, as Sarah said, we are all more than one thing. But what does that really mean when you're navigating the workplace, when you're more, if you're a queer disabled woman, if you're a Black woman, it is different to being a brown woman in the organization. If you're doing work around women's leadership, if you don't look at that from an intersectional perspective, for me, the work isn't important. So I really see intersectional leadership for me as using my power as a conduit for colleagues and their marginalized perspectives. That doesn't mean I know all their perspectives. I need to go and do the work around that, and really dismantling oppression in a workplace, trying to do that. But it is about being humble within that, and and really leading with empathy and emotional intelligence as well. Because also we are more than just oppression. And I think that is really important. It's something I say a lot to when I speak to our equity groups, you know, it probably come up later on, but we are so much more than just our marginalized identities. And that's really, for me, that's really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what a wonderful thing. The joys of celebration that make us up, our endurance, our power, but also our histories and the heritages that have been erased from those histories.
Yeah, I mean, I say all the time when people talk about whether it's a history month or something, and I'll say to people, I am more than racism. Let me tell you, being a brown woman is great. I love it. There's so many brilliant things about being a woman of color. It is much more than racism and sexism. So I think there's something around that as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Nelson, I'm excited. Your book, The Rise of the 2020 Leader, is doing so well. So I guess it's the question of leadership that I know feels deeply researched and close to your heart. We've had some colourful conversations in the past as well. So I'm enjoying this moment as well. I guess I'm going to ask you as well. I'll say it the same way. How do you personally, and I know that's a given, but how do you personally define intersectional leadership?
Yeah, firstly, I just wanted to just say I loved the points that Sarah and Mandeep made, particularly around being humble and humility. I think there's a new vocabulary of leadership in this new era, and situational humility, curiosity is such a superpower. So I do want to start with leadership, and so if I start with the foundational principle of leadership from my personal perspective, I believe that leadership is not a weapon to be wielded for personal gain. My perspective is that leadership is a gift. It's a responsibility to be shared in the service of others. So that's the foundation for me. And then if you overlay an intersectional lens on leadership, I like what Mandeep and Sarah said. I too am a student of leadership and a student of intersectional leadership. And I think it's something you grow into. You never stop growing. You never stop being curious. You never start learning about. So if I take that concept, right, and as someone trying to grow into becoming an intersectional leader, I want to be able to look in the mirror and be the reason that someone in my team who has multi-dimensional identities and experiences that makes them unique, those identities and experiences are seen, they're heard, they're recognized, and they're celebrated. I don't want to be the reason or contribute to the reason why those identities or experiences are ignored or criticized or hidden or held against you. And that for me is kind of a foundation to intersectional leadership, because unfortunately, the biases, the barriers, the oppression, the discrimination, it just shows up so much more acutely and is actually compounded for people that have intersectional identities. And I'm a bit of a geek and I do like to look at the data, but the data actually speaks for itself. As well, as I was preparing for this, I came across this McKinsey study they did in 2023, and it showed some really revealing and quite frankly disheartening insights into the experiences of intersectionality. But this particular report focused on women with intersectional identities, and I just wanted to please indulge me, but I wanted to kind of read 3 or 4 statistics. So it talked about how for every 100 men that got promoted to a manager role, 87 women got promoted, but only 54 Black women got promoted. Mm-hmm. If you compare it to men, and you think about this concept of multiple, so a multiple of 1.5 more women had experience of other people taking credit for their ideas. But when it came to LGBTQ plus women, it was twice as bad. And then for women with disabilities, it was 2.5 times worse. A couple more, just because I'm on a roll. When it came to experiences of being confused with someone else because of the same race or nationality. That experience for women was twice as much for men, but it was 5.5 times for women of color. And the final one is, commenting on one's experience in the workplace. 2.5 times experience more for women than men, and 6.5 times more for LGBTQ plus women, and 6 times for women with disabilities. And so, these kind of insights in this report, it really emphasized something for me. And a dear friend said this to me once. She said, Nelson, we may all be playing the same game, but a bumpy pitch is not the same as a smooth one. And so for people with intersectional identities, the pitch isn't just bumpy, it has potholes in it as well. And these just get compounded with these experiences of microaggressions and bias, which, frankly, just have this significant experience on someone's kind of sense of well-being, on their psychological safety, on their sense of belonging. And so for me, a part of being an intersectional leader is how do you level the playing field for those people under your care? And the final thing that I'd just say, Atif, is I think what Sarah and Mandeep were sharing was that people are dynamic and multidimensional, right? And so your leadership style needs to match that, right? You can't look at it through a binary, single axis framework. Right? It has to be dimensional. It has to be dynamic. So, I touched on the new vocabulary of leadership, and for me, it's about being a dynamic empathy, dynamic listening, dynamic curiosity, dynamic psychological safety, dynamic inclusion, and the list goes on. But those are the foundations for me around leadership, and then how you overlay intersectional leadership.
Great, thank you, and compelling in terms of the studies and the data as well. The control of data. It's very, I guess on a personal level, I'm conscious that we are leaders ourselves in this room, in this space. We're leaders as human beings. I know that, but also in the roles that we play in this call, the 4 of us. I often grew up with I grew up in the 90s, starting work at 16, and I'd hear the cliches of, my door is always open. And I always used to think, yeah, but crikey, it's hard to walk through it. And I'd be like 16, 20, I think I got to rehearse how I walk through that door. In fact, quite a few times I'd walk towards it and walk away. And my role today is to still hear that, whether I'm 16 or CEO, is to still hear that it is hard to walk through a door. Even if that person has an invitation, for somebody else, that invitation is an imposition. So what do we do as leaders? We're not psychic, but we can anticipate that we have power. And you've all touched on that. We can anticipate that our power in our hand as leaders comes with deep love, but also deep responsibility, And I don't know, I'm reminded of, I'm going to move to the next question, but I'm reminded of something that James Baldwin said, if I get it right, he said, not everything we face can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And it's the sincerity of that we go to the places where people don't feel powerful, or they share things because they're disclosing their differences for job protection, where job protection is mental health loss, or sharing is a celebration, as Mandeep touched on, that we're excited to tell these stories, not because we're insecure, but because we're welcomed. And what does a leader do to really show how welcome people are? Is go to the depths of intersectionality, not necessarily just using a buzzword, but to say, this is what we feel. This is what we recognize. This is where we stand. And it's a question of solidarity as well as, I think, just job protection or jobs or choices. Right, but let's get to the heart, because we're out of time, and this is such a good second question is, okay, so this is the bit I think that I want pragmatics, maybe not, but here, it's a question about building and maintaining effective teams. So the question is, building and maintaining effective teams often requires balancing individual needs with the needs of the entire group. If there's any Star Trek fans out there, remember the Vulcan thing of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. It's a Spock thing. I liked it. So I'm going to read it out. Building and maintaining effective teams often requires balancing individual needs with the needs of the entire group. Yes, that may be true. But what strategies or frameworks have you found helpful in ensuring diverse voices are heard and valued, whilst also driving collective progress?
Well, I suppose we've got a bit of a cycle going on here, so maybe I'll go next. But I think that this is a really interesting one. And as you were talking earlier on, Nelson, and then you, Atif, I struggle with this notion of bring your whole self to work, right? In fact, I don't like that term. And there are loads of reasons why, and I think it should be banned. But anyway, that's another issue, probably another session. But because I think it's a red herring in a way. And I also think when leaders say my door is always open, I think probably only 20% of the time they mean it, actually. And I think that, we've got into a habit of saying that when actually we know we don't mean it. And certainly in my organisation, which is quite big, there are 15 doors you need to walk through to get to me, actually. So, because it's a layered, multi-layered organisation, and that depth of hierarchy is one that we're trying to challenge and think about. But nonetheless, that is the structure in which we operate. And I think that the space for staff and the workforce is ever evolving, right? And I think that the workforce today is very different to 2019. And I think knowing how to have a conversation about what that means, really thinking about what are these shared expectations we have between us, what are yours about, as an employer, and so on and so forth. And I think we're really struggling to have those conversations. And I don't know that it's just mine. I think in lots of workplaces and organisations, particularly in civil society, where there seems to be a disconnect between, the vision of workplace and the reality of it, and the transitional space in between. And I think what we're trying to do and what I'm trying to do, and I've got a really great colleague here who this is one of her favourite sayings, Ariel. Her favourite saying is there are multiple truths. And I think that by being able to hold those multiple truths is incredibly important as part of that leadership function. But of course, in the area of intersectionality, that's very difficult. And actually, we've seen that in recent months where there are kind of global conflict. And how does that get understood and thought about in the workplace in a safe way? Again, I don't have the answer to that. But I think there is something about understanding the role of work. And I've been sort of grappling with this idea of the workplace is really important. And we have staff networks, we have training, we have, lots of initiatives going in. But there is something for me about also saying to people, we want you to thrive in your own lives outside of work. And your own lives are actually incredibly important. So how can we manage that tension in this idea of bringing your whole self to work, but actually we don't really want to see your whole self either. That the reality is that, when we're talking about managing issues of capacity, managing issues of income, all of that gets brought in. And, I agree with Mandeep. There has to be an element of dismantling to happen before you can really get to a place of intersectional leadership. But in doing so, the pain of that is profound and harmful and traumatic. And that's why many of us in leadership positions don't do it. Because you can be personally annihilated and your organisation can be annihilated. Yeah. And I think the fear of it is deep and enduring. It's a dangerous space. I was told by Camilla Batten-Engalage some years ago, chief executive of Kids Company, she sadly died over the Christmas break, someone I deeply admired. But she said that working in this space, really thinking about intersectionality, is risky business, and fundamentally that's why people don't do it. And so it's in the solidarity that I'm hoping we can create in the organisation. And that's not to say we're ever going to get to a place of agreement and it's all going to be settled. I think that's a fantasy. But what can we stand by? What do we mean when we talk about psychological safety? And it's not about being happy at work. That's not what psychological safety means. But we have a duty of care to our workforce. And I just think we're in this deep transitional phase. And I'm constantly on the lookout. Mandeep will know this because, you know, we've had this conversation. I'm on the lookout for the answer all the time. And it's hard and it's painful. And there are hostages to fortune in this work. And there are people who really suffer. And I know we will get to the hope, and I will do that. But I just think it's really important to acknowledge the pain of it, really, and the risks.
Yeah, no. So there's so much, Sarah. I want to jump in, but I'm going to keep my role as a chair. But absolutely. And again, it's the sincerity of that. I'm really grateful to. We are going to all walk each other home here, but it may be an intergenerational conversation as well as an intersectional one. You know, we may not even see this in a lifetime, and perhaps it would be, presumptuous to assume that we just would. You know, if we use racism, 400 years of systemic, structural, and relentless abuse is not something that we can just do from a workshop or from a LinkedIn conversation or even George Floyd. It is going to take a lot more than that to go to the depths in which is being demanded of us, and it will make it messy and it will hurt, but it will also birth something that maybe a generation that's not yet here will understand and look at us as good ancestors, should we have the courage to do it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Well, let's see. I'm keen to keep this conversation. Mandy, I'm going to do you all now. So I don't remember whoever, really, no order, but which of you would like to go next? If I ask the question, building and maintaining effective teams often requires balancing individual needs with the needs of the entire group. What strategies or frameworks have you found helpful to ensure diverse voices are heard and valued, whilst also driving the collective progress? Who would like that first?
Right, Mandeep, do you want to go first?
Mm-hmm.
No, should I go? Thank you. Sarah, so much of what you said really resonated, and I think we could probably have another 3 or 4 hours talking about that. And there was, it's about small steps, isn't it? And celebrating those small steps. And I think Martin Luther King once said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I always remind myself of that. And some of the things and the changes that might happen we may not get to see, but I believe in the power of collective, small, tiny movements forward, which you put them together and you start to see change. Maybe just to answer the question, I'll bring kind of maybe perhaps there's something you said about balance, Atif, which I think is really, really important. So I wanted to just share maybe a practical example that's founded on, some of my favorite topics, which is around psychological safety and inclusion. And it's, as a leader and as an intersectional leader, how can you in the workplace create an environment where all ideas are heard and evaluated equally? There's this quote from Susan Cain, and she says there's no correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. And I'll give you real practical examples to kind of bring that to life. So I'm going to generalize a little bit, but teams tend to default to brainstorming when coming up with ideas, right? You're told we've got this problem we need to solve, and what teams tend to do is they default to brainstorming. Now, don't get me wrong, brainstorming is important and it has an important role to play when it comes to idea generation, when it comes to problem solving, but it has limitations. And if you exclusively focus on this approach, what you tend to see is that 80% of the ideas come from 20% of the people in the room. That's what happens when you brainstorm. And the approach that you can probably know what I'm going to say next. The approach tends to favor extroverted thinkers, and so a thinking bias style kicks in. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens over time is if this becomes repeated and exclusively focused on that one way of exchanging ideas, you start to get exclusion. You start to get disengagement, and it actually stifles the richness of the discussion and the idea generation process that you get from having all these wonderful, diverse, divergent perspectives and thinking styles. And there's an opportunity cost to that, right? And the opportunity cost is you lose out on 80% of the ideas every single time. And so you talked about balance. I love that because it's about balance. And I mentioned intersectional leaders need to be dynamic, and part of being dynamic means you need to be able to create balance. So I'll offer a small, tiny alternative, which is how about you encourage all members to first write down their ideas. And if possible, actually do this anonymously. And then the group actually takes the time to discuss each idea on its merit. And it has this magical moment, right? Where it has this impact of everyone feeling heard. And actually what happens is you make better decisions. And this is why, because decisions and the ideas are democratized and evaluated on the strength of the idea, not who it came from. Right? It's evaluated on the strength of the idea and not who it came from. And for me, I think often we think of leadership and intersectional leadership as these big gestures, right? And these big, huge things. Actually, it's about atomic habits and compounding of atomic habits on small, tiny things, which use behavioral science, which says, make it easy, make it accessible, make it repeatable, make it relevant, make it purposeful. If you introduce, BJ Fogg's behavioral scientist said, plant a seed in the right spot and watch it grow without coaxing. I think that's really, really powerful when you think about trying to drive change and transformation, particularly as a leader. I could go on for hours. I'm going to stop there, but that's what I'd add.
Fantastic. There's lots there, and again, I'm grateful to that. And I touch on the humility side of that because it takes humility to go into a place to say, look, yeah, we're all at some point leveling up, masking, code switching, doing something just to cope. And in that space, we do make ourselves more. I'm a lot more introvert than the world I think knows. Sometimes I'm a lot more introvert than I remember, and so I definitely feel, yeah, absolutely, that those quiet ideas and those quiet spaces, the validity of those is lost in the storm of trying to be extrovert. Absolutely. Writing them down, I think, is brilliant. I guess I'm probably not alone on that. Lots of folks struggle with the writing, so they verbalize something with texture and sound and intonation, I guess, in the way that the writing. But the point is the agility, right? How do we find different ways of allowing that everyday belonging? And I guess it's that leader that doesn't say, go through my room, come through my room, welcome to my room. It's that humility of the leader who walks out of the room and goes to see, how do my team tell their stories? What ways make them feel safe when they do it? Absolutely brilliant. Thank you for everybody. And Mandeep, I need to bring this to you. So I'll read the question again, so building and maintaining effective team often requires balancing individuals' needs with the needs of the entire group. What strategies or frameworks have you found helpful in ensuring diverse voices are heard and valued whilst also driving collective progress?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, there's so much I could say to what Sarah said in terms of the pain and the consequences of doing this work, particularly if you're in our roles and you're challenging and the tightrope that you walk on and do this work. And in that McKinsey study, I was like, yeah, I could relate to all of that and having those experiences. So there's so much we could say there. But I think for me, in terms of individual needs and the entire group, I mean, that's our role as leaders to do. And we need to get really comfortable with that. And that's okay. I see myself. I don't want to work with a homogenous group. And we shouldn't. And there is no homogenous group. So the first thing for me is shared expectations, a collective understanding around what we're trying to create. And we'll get that from what your vision is as an organization. There will be differing views in terms of how we get to that vision. And to hear those differing views, like, I'm someone who welcomes dissent. I'm someone who welcomes diversity, like the diverse views. I have done enough work not to feel scared by that, but I also acknowledge that is scary for some. So for me, you can't move forward without hearing diverse views. They're one and the same. You have to do it. So, the second part of the question, which is, how can you value diverse voices while having collective progress? You get collective progress by valuing diverse voices. You have to do that. For me, and I'll be super quick, there's lots I could say in it, but I'll be quick because the next question is super juicy, is around trust. How you lead is, for me, it's really important to engender trust with the people that I work with. So, when there is conflict, and I'm also not adverse to conflict, I think it's a good thing, is how we manage it. How do we have those discussions? How do we show up and still show care and empathy in that space? There's all the pieces around that we know that we do. We work with our staff network groups. We ensure people feed in different ways, like Nelson was saying. But it's, how do we ensure it's not tokenistic as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like, just super quick in certain organizations I've been in, when there are recruitment for senior roles, and then you'll have a panel of people on equity groups on the panels, but actually they're what they say has no bearing on the final decision. Then why are we doing that if there's not, real like parity in the decision making power, in the sharing of power as well? So yeah, I'm gonna stop there.
There was so much there, Mandeep. Thank you. All you needed more time for this, but this was no. I mean, yeah. Look, I mean, there's so much about that, isn't it? And even in leadership, right? There is this space of what does it mean? It's almost like I didn't go to leadership school. I worked in a bank for 5 years as a 16-year-old, and many people did in my generation. But learned how to behave, but I don't know if I learned how to feel or feel safe. I learned how to conform, for sure. So the leader in me can look back on lots of things. I think you guys have touched on it, and know we are this good, not despite these things, but because of them. But we can be quickly brought back to, at least I can feel that, quickly brought back to something that didn't feel good. And then you're sort of wondering, what is that? Is that imposter syndrome? Is that? And then I kind of think, well, there's a word for those, but I also think if imposter syndrome keeps you humble, if it looks at how you govern your responsibility to stay close enough to what people are afraid of, then use it for a force for good. Because if you didn't have it, what do you have? You have this sense of hubris. Does that make you a good leader? So it's how we channel those thoughts and feelings. And how do we recognize our own limitations as leaders to make sure everyone is brought along on the collective progress whilst not leaving anyone behind? It's a big challenge. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm going to indulge myself and then ask the question. I look at our own team at Diversity and Ability, and yeah, we get a lot of attention, and it's great what we do. But I've always said, look, diversity is about counting people, and inclusion is about insisting people count. How do we not recognize that when we're up against things that just want to play diversity hierarchies with us, or the world that asks us just to do this part of it and not recognizing the intersectional realities that says that part isn't enough and it's not going to work without all those other parts of a person's human experience that tells us stuff. So, but we continue, and we are more than hopeful as we continue. So my last question to you all, and I'm going to just really start, maybe Nelson, I'll start with you on this, if it helps, but I'll just invite you all. But I want to ask, given the things that we've talked about, given the fact that there is a lot at stake here, and I do not believe it's just about individuals or being good leaders. I think it's more to do with the future of the children that we have or hope to have, or at least connect to, the choices they make and their children after that, as to what is a thing we do around here. We get this right around here because, 2024, they did that. This is what we do around here. We make this matter not because it's nice, not because it's good, not because it's got rights, but because we can't get to a good place without that participation. That we cannot keep continuing about the silos of we're going to talk about anti-racism one day, women the next day, maybe gender pay one day, maybe disabilities when it had its moment. But we're not going to actually get to a space where everybody has to be involved in this, because our collective liberation, not just our workplace or our mental health, but our collective liberation is at stake here. That we need so many people's experiences to enrich the work that's ahead of us. And if that's not intersectional, then I don't know what is. It's a duty, right? But here we are. So I'm going to ask this question, really. Elsie, now maybe I'll start with you. And it's a simple one, but take it wherever you want. What keeps you hopeful?
It's a great question, actually. I just wanted to, before I just jumped in there, the conversation that you and Mandeep were just having earlier just really kind of hit home around humility, being humble, and then you talked about it through the elements of kind of imposter syndrome. And I remember once, I don't know if I read this or where I got this, but this is the thing about kind of humility, is that if you're not willing to listen, then you're not ready to learn, and you're not ready to grow. And I think that's just such an important point. But what keeps me hopeful, when I first started to think of this idea of writing a book in 2020 about leadership, as a student of leadership, I realized that there was this quiet yet intentional movement that was happening. It was a quiet but intentional movement around what does it take to be a great leader today, and it was not command and control. There was this kind of new kind of vocabulary that was emerging, and then you had people like the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. And I think she has very visibly and very clearly and very loudly role modeled, articulated, and demonstrated the impact of leading with all of the vocabulary we've talked about today, which is around humility and courage and empathy and inclusion and trust. And I think we sometimes forget, if we think about the period of time that she was that she was in the role, it was in one of the most challenging times of New Zealand's history ever. Right? There was the devastating kind of volcano eruption. There were the attacks, and then the COVID pandemic hits. And if you look at, and it was all concentrated in that kind of 2 to 4 year period. But if you look at all of the leaders, she's certainly someone that sort of stood head and shoulders above others when it came to leading her country during this period. And I often think to myself, if someone like her and the real problems that she was trying to solve, if she can lead with that vocabulary, there is no excuse for anyone else to not be able to. And so it started with this quiet but intentional movement, but I think it's starting to gather momentum. It's starting to gather more awareness. And I overindulge and over-index on leaders because I feel like leaders amplify. They amplify what is accepted, tolerated, celebrated, and recognized. Amplify. It's this pebble that goes into this water and it ripples. That's the power of leadership, right? And so there's a huge responsibility. But I feel hopeful because I see more examples. I also see negative examples, but I see more positive examples of this new vocabulary of leadership that's coming through. So that's what keeps me hopeful. That's how I'd answer that question.
Super. Thank you, Nelson. Thank you. Mandeep, I think I'll go to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to answer it from the perspective of hope when it comes to advancing equity and trying to dismantle. And I loved this question when I saw it because, I always say to my colleagues, I'm a prisoner of hope.
Yeah. Wow.
I have to be to do what I do.
Beautiful.
Because there's a lot of pain in what I do as well.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I don't shy away from sharing that, of how difficult this work is. And the pain, not just that I experience from my experience of what I see of other minoritized groups, or how my frustration at the pace of change sometimes. And it's not a linear, you'll take a step forward and maybe 30 back. So there's a lot of pain, but there's so much hope, which is why I feel, why I've been doing this work as long as I do. I'm so passionate about it. It gets me out of bed. It drives me because I see the power of hope. We can see it in so many movements. I'm not going to go through all of them. Hope is a part of those movements, and look at, of what can be, what could be. And we've seen a lot of that happen. So I think hope is something we need to propel us forward. But to get the hope, for me, is about community. Who do we surround ourselves? Where do we get solidarity from? Where can I go to say I've had a really difficult time?
Mm.
Who do I go with just to cry? Who do I go with just to say, this is what happens to minoritized group, and have that sense of community, or just have fun within that space? So, and I also get hope from, I know the power of this work. I know what it means when you are listened to and valued and seen. If I think about who I was 30 years ago, I have experienced more liberation on that path. There's a lot more to do, but that is because of lots of different actions of people before me. And I know the power, because people share it, of the small things I do and how that impacts them.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing stays the same. So, and I really believe in the human condition to change. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't do this work, and I would do my plan B, which is go work with baby animals. So, I really believe in that, and I hold on to it. And I also just want to say, for me, hope and joy are a way of resisting oppression, that we hold on to it so we don't just fall into the oppression. And I got that from Toni Morrison. And I really am very, very active around chasing that. But it's not easy, this work. So you do have to be hopeful.
Mm. Thank you, Mandeep. The depth of that. Yeah, absolutely. I'm feeling it. And I want to just make a few seconds, if I can, in my head, just to stay with that. There is so much to celebrate about us. Yeah, we are, and you said it earlier, we are not just our oppressions. And the people around us are not that as well. The world owes a debt to our differences, everybody's differences, regardless of what protection they may come in, or privilege and such. But our differences, God, crikey, wouldn't it be a pity if we were ashamed of our differences to such an extent that we feel we're too privileged, we're too fortunate to have any space to share our stories? Because ultimately our individuals, our maps to the world was built in our childhood, regardless of where we were born, who we were born to. There's never not going to be a contribution to that. And I think it's beautiful, the sense of hope that we're going to give, that everybody is invited to tell that story, kill shame when they do it, and be part of something that makes us all part of something far richer than just protected characteristics that we've decided are fashionable to talk about at different points, rather than to talk about because they matter. Anyhow, that said, I'm indulging myself maybe. Sarah, I want to ask you, and I'm going to finish here with you in this question. I don't know, but you have the space to say, if I ask you, Sarah, what keeps you hopeful?
Well, it's interesting actually, because for about 25 years in my career, people who've worked with me will have heard me say, part of our job in the social sector, and it should be written into our job descriptions, is to hold on to hope when all hope is lost. That's our fundamental function within the sector. And when you decide to come in to these roles, that's what you're also signing up to, right? You're not just there to admire despair. You are there to believe that things can be better, and that you have to work on that, and you have to soothe it and feed it, and all of the things Mandeep has said around celebration and joy is absolutely right. And it's celebrating those small wins as well as the big ones. And you have to actively look out for those. And then I suppose I've got other things. My battery's going to go and I can't find the leads. I'm going to get them in really quickly, which is there's two things for me. The first thing is that we look for triggers a lot, right? We look for triggers a lot that sort of teach us what we need to change. But there's a new concept. It's not that new for people like us, maybe, but the notion of glimmers. So we've got triggers and then glimmers. What are the glimmers every day that you can hold on to? The glimmers of change in people's eyes, the conversation you're having with a naysayer, and then you've said something and you think, they've just got that. Pay attention for those, because that's food. That is food for our souls, and we have to hold on to them. We look for triggers, but that can't be all we look for. And I then finally, and this is a bit naff, but I'm going to say it anyway, the young people that I'm surrounded by, particularly my kids, when I go home and I say to them, I've learned some brilliant new thing about the world, and they say to me, we already knew that, Mum. And I'm like, okay, all right, okay. And that's seeing in young people the growth that I have contributed, because I have created the conditions for them to learn this stuff, the joy and the celebration and the commitment to humanity. So that is hope for me. And, I'll leave it there. But hope at these moments, especially, we have to feed it, and we have to feed each other as well.
Brilliant, all of you. I'm going to hand to Scarlett now, but I'm just going to say thank you for the time, the energy, the kindness, and to keep it hopeful. You guys have definitely done that. Scarlett, to you.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for the conversation. It's been such an incredible combination of the big picture, societal barriers and pains, and with some really incredible practical and granular takeaways as well. I just want to end by bringing us back to Sarah's very first point today about being an intersectional leader in training. And I think that's very true for everyone, no matter whether you have the word lead or leader in your role title or not. And I think this has been absolutely very impactful training and learning for everyone who's attended today. So thank you all. So our next panel in the series will be the final panel for now. And it's going to be an amazing one again. So please do join us for the next one on Tuesday, the 20th of February. That session is called Doing Justice to Intersectional Stories, Inclusive Communications. And as a reminder, every one of our previous panels is up live on our YouTube channel, so you can check them out in full. And finally, if you have any follow-up learning you really want to get to today, we've written up a quick guide to becoming a more intersectionally inclusive leader on our blog, so you can check that out on our website as well. So that's diversityandability.com. Again, a final thank you to all three of our panelists and our amazing chair, Atif. And we hope to see you at the next one.